Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
All right. So I think if you want me to start, the way the thoughts that I have about this subcommittee or whatever we want to call it is first of all to define it, and to me, part of the definition is to call it what it is. And from my perspective, diversity is like, the $5 word when it really should contain something about racial equality or whatever, because it's more encompassing. And the discussion, I think, in our nation and our world right now is racial equality and systemic racism, and that we really need to hit it for what it is. So my first suggestion is to look at what kind of, what we want to call it, and then branch out from there. So what are your thoughts?
Um, I think that I think that's a good idea. I also think that it's more than race. I think that it's disadvantage of students based on a lot of different factors, to include economic disadvantage, to include ethnic background, to include cultural differences. And I also think that we don't have to be, we should consider our audience. Because to me, this is a community, we're looking for a
That's what I
community
wanna do.
shift.
Right.
And so if we call it systemic racism, we are going, and I'm not denying systemic racism exists, but I do know that there is a faction or a significant portion of people that believe that systemic racism doesn't exist. So what do we call it to bring everybody into the conversation? Because if we call it that, then we automatically stiff arm some people, and I don't want to stiff arm anybody. I want everybody to feel.
Well, part of it, I think, is our whole purpose in being is education. So if we are to educate people, then in fact, I think it goes both ways. I think we need to first listen to see what they don't know. It's almost like, giving an FSA exam and say, what do you know? So we know what level to start you at. And in order to do that, I believe this should be an open forum. I believe we should start out with an open forum, because you have your beliefs and your thoughts, I have mine, but I don't represent every black person. I represent some. I understand the struggle. I understand why it's called systemic racism. But I don't represent everybody. So I believe our starting point, instead of starting within at the district, is to start without in the community. And I think before we concretize what it is this is going to be, that we have a template of, okay, we want to look at the name. We want to look at the goals and the structure of it. We want to look at where we go from here. But when I say we, it's a collective we of the community.
Can I ask a question? Mm-hmm. First of all, I want to say that somebody told me that in order to move forward through this, we have to have uncomfortable conversations.
Very much so.
I have to say things that I would perhaps previously been afraid to say because it might have been wrong, perceived as wrong. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say things that might be wrong, and I'm going to.
Well, let me stop you. There's no wrong questions.
There could be.
No, it's how.
You know how I say things, Gwen. There could be wrong things.
But the thing is, how do I know what you think as a Caucasian female? Right. Because you don't know what I think.
Right.
And
exactly.
and saying that is saying that it's going to be wrong because you're assuming that I'm going to take it that way. That's one of the first things, is not to assume.
Okay. Okay.
Don't assume that I'm going to say, oh my God, look what she said. No, just say what you have to say, and then me, Gwen, has to determine how I'm going to accept that.
All right, so this to me could be considered an example of systemic racism in the school district of Lee County. And tell me if this is your understanding of systemic racism. So we have a student code of conduct that, from my understanding, potentially punishes students for having hair colored anything other than a natural color. And it was explained to me that women of color have a special relationship with their hair. That's how it was explained to me. And so you have a 13-year-old girl whose mom buys her a burgundy dress to go to church on Easter Sunday and wants to put burgundy highlights in her hair. And now mom has to worry, I can't put those burgundy highlights in her hair because she's going to get in trouble at school. Now, that it's been said to me, the reason why we don't allow funky hair colors is for classroom control. As a teacher for how many years, you know that you can have a purple-haired kid, a green-haired kid, and a red-haired
And
kid,
a bald kid.
and it doesn't matter. That a good teacher is going to be able to control the classroom or manage the classroom regardless of hair color. So to me, that's an example of how we have something in our system that potentially punishes students based on their culture or their race. So is that, when we talk about systemic
Very
racism?
good example.
Okay.
And in our nation, in our world today,
And
as opposed to 10 years ago, if you have purple hair and orange on the other side, it's no big deal. Nobody's going to stop and go, oh, look.
But is it a stereotypical statement for me to say women of color have a special relationship with their hair? Is that racist of me? Is that am I stereotyping?
It's sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Maybe just the term they have a special relationship, kind of like, okay. So perhaps saying it, how can I rephrase it? Women of color are very aware and concerned about how they look.
And there's nothing natural about the color of my hair, by the way. And I don't get punished for it, right?
No, you
Right?
don't. You don't. And
So
I'm proud to say I got some streaks up in here.
That's
But anyway.
kind of my point. So tell me again.
So in other words, instead of the way you said it was just slightly in the condescending. They have a special relationship. Just kind of sounds a little bit over.
Okay.
Okay? Would you say to a white woman that dyes her hair, and I used to work with this woman, that whatever outfit she wore, she dyed her hair. Okay? Would you say to her she has a special relationship with her hair? Or would you just say, wow, she really is, aware and concerned about fashion and how she looks?
Yes. Okay. I hear you. And that leads me to another question. I said women of color. What terminology am I supposed to use? Is it black women? Is it African American? Is it
Don't
women of
ask
color?
me. I've been black, I've been Negro, I've been African American, I've been all of it. So I personally do not get offended by whatever terminology, except for a few of them, and you know what I'm talking about. I think my answer to that is I would rather for you to talk to me than not talk to me because you're worried about what to call me.
Okay.
My name is Gwen, and I happen to be black. So some of the fear, I think, of white people is, especially in times like this where everything is right out there in our face. It's like, oh, if I say this, and oh, if I say that. I'm going to give an example. I had an interview a few weeks ago. I thought it was absolutely fascinating because it was me and a young white guy that is very rightist. And I told him, I said, I'm a little concerned as to how this is going to go. We were supposed to be like 20 or 30 minutes. We went on for 50 minutes, and then we had to stop. And it's out on Facebook, on social media. Anybody can take a look at it. And he asked me hard questions about how I felt about white privilege and these types of things and systemic racism. And I'll give you the example. I gave the example of systemic racism as like a root canal. A couple months ago, I had to have a root canal. And I'm in the dentist's office, and she's taking out the bad nerve and everything. And then she took an x-ray to see if she had it all and found that there was a little bit left in there. And so she packed it temporarily, and I had to go to a specialist who had to take the packing out and take the rest of it out, then repack it. Then I had to go back to my dentist to get it filled properly. That's what systemic racism is. It's been there. It's a bad nerve. If she hadn't done that one x-ray, a couple of months down the road, I would have had pain like crazy. We have issues that happen where people are killed and things are wrong and things are bad. And then we get over it and we pack it. Okay? Nerve's still down under there. It's systemic. It's not gone away.
Okay.
And then you turn on your television set one morning and you see someone with a knee in someone's neck and just looking around like it's just nothing. The pain starts again. Sometime or another, we have got to get all of it out. And I don't know if we ever will. Because there are people that when they sit around the dinner table or they sit out on the porch and talk with their friends that go fishing, they talk about things that would be offensive to me. But if you raise up a child and at the dinner table that's what they hear, I can't blame that child when they come to school and they call me something.
Right.
Because that's what they've been taught.
Right.
So that's where our part of educating people comes into play.
And that, you've just hit the nail on the head with my struggle. You know me, I'm very government function and roles and policies and rules and laws and all that. And that, you know, as I give you that example from our student code of conduct, I see that that's something that we as a board, we can have a discussion. As a district, we can comb through our policies, we can comb through our processes, our procedures, our student code of conduct, and determine what changes to make there. But how do we, we don't have the ability or the authority or the power to change people's hearts and minds. And that's where I struggle. I struggle with those conversations that are taking place around the dinner table at night that are, that as terrible as they are, it is a parent's right to say those things to their kid.
Yes, it is.
And so what role can we as a governing body play in changing hearts and minds? I don't know how to do that as a government entity. I mean, I know that the things that we say in our position of leadership, if that's what you want to call it, in our tiny little corner of Lee County here, the things that we say publicly to people on this subject can set the tone, either for good or for bad. But in terms of this committee and the work of this leadership team, what can we do?
We set policy, and we say that all the time. We set policy. So I remember it was a Dr. Graham, or one of the previous leaders used to say, they don't keep the good ones at home. You know, the parents, they send us all that they've got, the good, the bad, and the ugly. They don't keep the good ones hidden. So let me fast forward and then go backwards. When you turned on the TV a couple of weeks ago and you saw the crowds and the throngs of people across the world, they didn't all look like me.
Right.
So someone had educated those children, those people, because some of them standing in that crowd did sit around the table, did sit around the fire, and did learn that I was not as good, that I was not equal. But what happened? They were educated. They came to school. They sat next to me. They talked to me. They listened to me. They understood, well, you know, she's not all that bad. She doesn't smell and, you know, whatever. That's what we have to do. We talk about combing through our policies, and we can do it, but we need the public to say, what of our policies has caused you angst? What of our policies has caused you staying up at night? What of our policies has hurt your child? And listen to them.
Yeah.
And this is why. Um, when we have and I know I'm not going to talk about it, but when we have the student meetings about what's going to happen to students, I truly wish I could just shrivel up into nothing and just roll out of the room. Because it's a lose-lose for me. You know, do you follow the letter of the law? Do you look in the eyes of this mother and at her tears and angst for her child and help her out? Do you look at the 94,999 other students that we have to keep safe? It makes it, very difficult. When you talk about what to do, I think we have to stay true to who we are, and that's educators. And we educate through our policies, we educate through our behaviors, we educate through our ability to listen. We educate through what people see us do. Somebody educated all of those thousands of people, and young people at that are out there making a change.
I think we educate through our culture too, right? Like what I've seen happen in the wake of George Floyd that I haven't necessarily seen before is people aren't staying silent anymore.
Very true.
If something is said that's offensive or racist or inappropriate, people aren't just walking away because that is an uncomfortable conversation to have. And I'll give you an example. And I think I talked to you about this. I'm sorry to sit here with my back to you, but
It's okay. I'm just here in case you have a legal question.
okay, right. Somebody was having a conversation with me about something, and they said, "Well, that's not blatantly racist." And I was like, "Why does it have to be blatantly racist to be offensive, right? Like, why are we only calling people out on things that are blatantly racist? Racial undertones in our communications shouldn't be acceptable. Racial undertones in our policies, in our student code of conduct, in the way we interact in this building and in our buildings shouldn't be acceptable." So I think that's where perhaps Jared Eady comes into play, helping us figure out how to improve the culture for all students and all employees.
And I agree, but I again go back to sooner than later we need to involve the community. And an ultimately wonderful thing in my mind would be to have that open conversation with not just people of color, but Caucasians and Latinos and everybody giving their impression.
Yeah.
Because, and something you said, I have to mention this, that people are feeling more comfortable saying it. That's very true. I feel that way. I felt that way when I kept hearing people say, why do you have to say Black Lives Matter? Why do you have to put it out there? One of the reasons in saying it and calling it racism and not diversity is that it does hurt. It hurts. It hurts to have to say that this is happening to someone who looks like me. It hurts and I told people this over and over again, I think the most telling thing to me was watching the look on the face of the person that was actually killing someone in front of the world.
It was definitely like the
and
dead
when
in the
he
eyes.
looked
Just dead in the
down
eyes.
as if to say, is it over yet? And then looked back up and put his hand on his hip like, we got a little more time. And it's just like you've heard people say, they saw their face. I saw my son's face. I saw him laying there saying, Mama, help me. And I think that's what finally helped us to dig down and take more of that bad nerve out. It's not all gone yet. Because then a few days later, we had this situation with this contract, and because it went one way or the other, I got all kinds of.
All right, board members, so we're going to be
All right.
careful about that.
Okay. Let's say things that happen on the board, because I am the only minority, I get blamed for. Okay? And, oh, I know you didn't. No, not necessarily. But I go back to, we need to change policies. We need to have education. Education meaning classes. We need to have history classes about every culture.
Yeah, well, that's, if I can jump in, that's a huge problem. I mean, I didn't even know Juneteenth existed. I didn't know about Black Wall Street. Why is it that I'm blankety blank years old and
Right.
I'm a highly educated woman and I'm just learning in the year 2020 about these massive events in our nation's history that, like, why didn't I learn about that in school?
Because it wasn't important.
I,
at the
I
time.
understand, but
Yeah.
that's where we can
And
make
that's
change.
what needs to happen.
Exactly.
And it's interesting you mentioned, the Juneteenth issue. As I was listening to it unfold and reading about it, it was interesting that the town in Texas was like 2 years after everyone else had been freed.
Yeah.
And 2 years later, they didn't know. My mind went to Lee County that 10 years after the law to desegregate was when we got. We're behind.
Yeah, and having conversations with people in this community who lived through that, very, very, very enlightening. You know, I come here from another place. I don't even know how long I've lived here now, maybe 9-10 years. And I wasn't part of those struggles. I wasn't part of the evolution of what happened. And you brought it up at yesterday's workshop, making sure, achieving unitary status is one thing. And I believe we achieved it when did we achieve it? 1990? I think we achieved unitary status in 1990. But whatever we do for proximity, we can't go backwards. And I don't know how to achieve efficiency in transportation while maintaining diversity. I don't know how to do it.
And I've said it since they first brought it up. And when it was first brought up, it was talked about, saving on transportation and all that. And my first question is, how do we maintain equity? Because somebody's going to be bussed.
Right.
Somebody is going to be bussed. Who is it?
Right.
How do we decide which kid is going to get on the bus and have to drive?
Yeah, and I feel like, from my perspective, we're too early in the process for me to draw any conclusions because these guys have done it before and they've done it with a high degree of success. Now, Lee County, of course, is unique, but we all believe. We all believe where we are is unique because we love where we are, or at least I love where I am.
Well, and the thing about it is, and I've heard this from other people in the community, yes, we trust the professionals to do what they do, but in so many instances, the train has left the station and then they ask the community. And we've already, we're barreling down the track. Excuse me. We spent all of this money to get where we are. And then we ask, well, what do you think? And then there's that, we've already done this and we've already whatever. We need to, when we talk about inclusiveness, it needs to start earlier. I was and still am very concerned about the opening of school situation. We don't have input from everybody. We don't have input from that mother that's a single mother living in a 2-bedroom with 4 kids that had 1 Chromebook. We hear Oh, but if you wanted to have an extra Chromebook, you could. I was invited to be on a Zoom meeting with 7, 8 parents, all minorities. None of them had more than one, and they asked. So how do we communicate that we're leaving people behind? Because those kids that were 4 in that family that only had one Chromebook, and one was in high school, one was in middle, and one was in elementary, and the elementary teachers wanted their kids on at this time, and the middle school class was at this. How do we? So somebody lost. How do we look at everything we do, sifting it out? Is it equitable to everybody?
Right, and that I agree, that the identification of the communication issues, we talked about this at yesterday's workshop, we all agree that we're not reaching every piece of the community. We all agree that every part of the community is not engaged. We all agree that it is definitely a concern, and how do we engage every single kid, every single family, every single child, every single time? That's what I'd like to focus on. I'd like to be solutions oriented. I'd like to make sure that we really, whatever this does, whatever this looks like, we come forward with some actual actionable solutions that we can bring to the board for recommendations, because I think that's the point of a subcommittee, right? Subcommittee is to bring
Bring it back to the
recommendations
board.
forward to the board.
The thing that you mentioned a few minutes ago, that with all that has happened with George Floyd and all of the other lives that were lost recently, that people are speaking out more. And I said that I am as well. And I will say, I have attempted to talk with staff, to talk with the board, to say we need to do this. And it is very frustrating to not have that move ahead.
But what is the this? We need to do this. What is the this?
I have suggested, when we were talking about the survey for going back, and I made the suggestion, not more than 5 questions. Number 1, not more than 5 questions. And the 5th question is, if you want to be contacted to give more information, what is your contact information? The first 4 questions, first off, we shouldn't be sending out stuff to all of our demographic, of all of our parents and students, if it's above 7th grade level. That is just a fact. Nationally, the reading level is 6th and 7th grade. Now you add in there the language barriers, and you're already leaving out people. So 5 questions, and 1 is your information if you want to fill that out. A continuum question. How well has distance learning worked for your child? Do you think they learn? 1 being 0, really bad, 10 being good. People can understand that. It came out, first off, the instructions were in English. That if you want to fill this out all in English, you can choose English, Spanish, or Creole. Well, if all I speak is Spanish or Creole, I don't know what you're telling me to do. So, first off, the level of reading, check it. We can do readability on everything we send out. Who are we trying to impress? Using $25 words to explain that we're going to have a this or a that? Who are we trying to, are we trying to impress someone or inform and educate our community? So that was one of the things. The level, the readability level, fewer questions. When it first came out, there were 70 questions. I know it was a glitch, but then we should have scrapped it and started again. But it was fixed, and then it was 25 questions. I still had people say, I got through the first couple, and I'll go back and I'll finish it later. And they never did.
So let me ask you this. Since we're kind of talking generally about different topics, I think the first thing that the board members were trying to decipher is, what are you going to call it?
Yep.
What's the objective?
Yep.
So maybe we can have some direction in terms of what are you going to call it?
Yep.
And what's the objective? the things that I'm hearing that's coming out is inclusiveness, starting early with whatever the processes there are, the education, the information that's going out, making sure that we communicate and reach out to the various community members, the proximity, being equitable to everyone, and making it solutions oriented. So at this point, what's it going to be called and what are your objectives?
Can I just say, I've kind of narrowed down as I'm writing in communication, curriculum, and policies.
And strategic plan, if you wouldn't mind adding that. I think,
Well, that
and this is just me, one of seven, but making equity and diversity the fifth leg of our strategic plan
So,
forces us to see everything through that lens.
okay, so if you're looking at it visually, wouldn't strategic plan be the overarching, and underneath that, the communication, curriculum, and policies?
Well, our strategic plan currently has 4 legs.
Right, but I'm saying that's like, to me, our strategic plan is our crux. It's our plug it into the wall. It's where we get
Right.
juice to move forward.
Right.
So that's kind of a given that these items would be infused into our strategic plan. If we named it, racial equality or whatever we want to name it, and added it to our strategic plan, what are the things underneath that? Does that make sense to you? Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm not
So
following.
like when you have a strategic plan, you have a broad area, and underneath that you have the objectives.
Yes.
And that's what she's referring to, that the broad area is whatever you want to call it, something with regards to equity and inclusion, and underneath that is to address policy issues, address communication issues.
Okay, okay, I understand. See, the way I'm looking at it is, you know that, it's not a graph, it's a chart, maybe, I guess, that we get when the superintendent and staff goes through the strategic plan, retroactively looking over the past year. These were our goals. This is how we did or did not reach those goals. And then these are the plans for next year with regard to the strategic plan. And there's this, I might be able to think of the right word. It's not a chart, but it's like, being sure that we have less than 1% open seats at the beginning of the school year under HR.
Oh, right. I know what you're saying.
And so that goal over here is all 4 of the legs of the strategic plan, and does that goal check each one of those boxes?
Right.
And so if we have a 5th line, so that hiring is done through the lens of equity and diversity, then we know that equity and diversity is being looked at in every single decision we make, every single goal we set, every single thing this district does really should be viewed through the lens of the strategic plan. Right now, 4-legged strategic plan, but adding that 5th leg requires us to continue to have this conversation. And like you said, in the past, we've had the conversation and then it sort of died down. I have on my computer every 2 weeks. I put it on my computer, and the fact that I have to remind myself puts me in a different position than you're in because I don't live it. But I refuse to allow this conversation to die down. I absolutely refuse to allow it to die down, and I think one of the ways to embed it into the culture of the district is to make sure that we're looking at everything through that lens. Am I making sense?
No, you are here, but here's the thing. So you got 4 legs of strategic plan. You add a 5th leg. Right now, with the 4 legs, once each one is defined and what it does, then we have that kind of spoke out to the side. How is this one being done in this area, and how's this one? Okay, and all of them are not going to connect in every area that we deal with, but we're just going to add the 5th one, and then it becomes a part of that same conversation. When we send out stuff that says, okay, we're bringing this up as it relates to strategic plan number 3. And it says it on our agenda.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay?
Exactly.
So we're just adding a 5th one. And the components of that 5th one, if we agree, our communication policy and curriculum.
Understood, okay. All right, I hear you.
All right, and I can do it visually, so when we present it to the group, then they can see what we're talking about as well.
All right, so another thing is very data-driven. I'm very, very data-driven. And so for me, it will be important, the engagement of the community, I know, is one of the things you said. So I don't know how you envision that taking place. Is it through town halls, and how do we get people to show up to town halls in the middle of a pandemic? Like, how do we engage the community? How do we have these conversations with the community? And how do we gather data from those, if it is a town hall, I'm just using that, to bring that back to the board?
Okay. Let me first say this. This topic and this discussion, you can use data to help, spread the word and say this is what we're doing. But it's more than a data discussion. It's deeper than a data discussion. We can show 3-4 years down the road that because we did the strategic plan, our discipline numbers have dropped by 10-20%. That's using the data. But what's behind that drop in 10-20% is emotional, is feeling, is more than just the raw data. Because behind each one of those numbers, if we were to drop 10%, each one of those kids has a better opportunity to move forward with their life and their education because they were not caught up in because they looked at somebody funny. They got a referral. That's what I really hope that people understand. When Caucasians, when white people say to me, what can I do? And I say, you hear me, but you're not listening. Because you listen with your eyes and your ears and your heart and your mind. Because when you hear what I'm saying, you're still filtering it through your knowledge and experience. When I hear you talk, I'm filtering it through your knowledge and experience. And sometimes I can say, well, that's just the way this person is. And sometimes the pain is too hard to just say that's just the way they are. I have to say, it's not okay. I'm tired of hurting. I'm tired of saying, hey, over here. And I think what people have to understand is when is it okay to infuse data and feelings and emotions all together? We've got to get to that point. We cannot be so data-driven that we're driven by data and we forget that each one of those numbers is a person that is going through something, that is being separated out from the rest of the group for some reason.
Yeah, I don't, I opposites track. That's why we're on this board. That's why we're on this subcommittee.
You know what?
My brain doesn't work that way. Like, how do I identify a problem if I don't have data showing me that there's a problem? You know what I mean?
Because if you look at me, and in the topic that's being talked about, you look at me and you see tears in my eyes. You have to be able to separate the data and say, oh, there's one black woman that's got tears in her eyes. As opposed to, here's a person that's in pain. And my wish and desire for you looking at that would be to ask me and to listen to my answer. Why is that affecting you so much?
So why is this affecting you so much?
Because it is very real. It is very difficult to, geez, we got cut the cameras. It is very difficult to try to represent who you are and what you believe and still fit in and infuse into a system that doesn't really accept that. And please don't take this wrong, but when you say, well, I look at the data and I look at the emotion and I look at, well, why is someone saying that? And if we don't come together somewhere and people listen to you more than they listen to me, then our district is all based on what's the data say? How many black children are sent out of school? How many white children? How many Hispanic children? What is that achievement gap? I'm trying to say we need to look at that achievement gap as not just numbers on a paper, but children that are falling through the cracks. There's an individual child that is not going to have the opportunity to necessarily sit where I'm sitting or do what I'm doing because they're in that chasm of that achievement gap.
Yeah, and that is definitely a criticism that I've received before. Like I remember when I was out educating the public on the half-penny sales tax, talked a lot about data and talked about increases in graduation rates. And, I explain it. 30,000 foot view, my role as a board member, 30,000 foot view is to look at the data. And I was criticized, and they say, Chris, data represents children. And
It's a person.
I get that. And I do need to address the rhetoric I use surrounding that, because I do genuinely understand that if we close the achievement gap for just one child, it matters. But if we don't close the achievement gaps more rapidly, individual children are left behind. And I do understand that it impacts children. I get that, and I do need to find a better way of communicating that. I just, again, should I say people of color? Should I say African American? Should I say black? Should I say data? Should I say individual children? Like what's the goal? Like,
my answer to that
where do we
is
go?
that's the least of it. The most important thing is that you discuss it. What you label that child to be, okay? People talk about the Black Lives Matter and why all lives matter and all of that. But if you feel, and this is the thing, you cannot discount my feelings just like I can't discount yours. But we can discuss it and talk about it and help you understand why I feel like I do. But if you're in a position, and, we'll say the ugly word, the privilege word, if you're in a position that you can understand what I have to say and listen to me, or you don't have to, because you're still going to be in your same position. What I say and do is not going to affect your status and where you're at, not one bit. But it does to me. It does to me. And I don't know. I think don't worry so much whether we're, black or African American or whatever. There is a child that looks like this, that doesn't look like this child, that's not having the same opportunity. Every child achieves their own personal highest potential. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. And what makes it all hard in education is that people that work in education still come in with their own filters. We have teachers with their own filters. We have teachers that will look at the class and go, oh, you know. So that's where Jared and the training and all of that. And, you know, speaking of training, we as a board had 3 different trainings about unconscious bias. I don't feel it's stuck. I don't, because, and one of the things is you can't just, you know, hose off with the garden hose and expect to get rid of all of the, you know, the stuff that's been built up. It has to be continuous. And that goes back to that root canal. We got to keep trying to make sure we get it all out. We don't have it all out. So I say to you, as a white woman of privilege, that's just the way it is. When you ask me what to do, listen and discuss. Don't listen with, oh, you know, I know already what this person's going to say. I know what this person thinks. No, you don't. You don't.
Okay, so I think I listened, but again, I don't have your experience, so I don't know whether I listened appropriately. But I did hear what Attorney Dupree-Bruno said, and I still feel very uncomfortable with my back to you, but, and I don't have to call you that. Well, I do, because we're still on camera. What are we going to call it, and what are we going to do?
My suggestion is to involve the people that it involves. We can talk about how that looks in the middle of a pandemic. We have continued to run the district and have meetings in the middle of a pandemic, and we can still do it. We may have to go where they are. We may have to mail, like one of the suggestions I had about the reopening, mail out a form and then allow them to bring that form when they come and pick up food at our distribution grab and go. Not make it that they have to mail it back, but you can just drop it off here, or you can drop it off at any school.
So you envision this to be like a survey that we put out?
No, it can be, but I think it needs to be multifaceted. Because that way, the ones you don't reach with the survey, you reach with a town hall, or you reach with a Zoom, or you reach with a whatever, or you reach through a church service, or, you know, whatever it is that you have to do. We have to unearth every possible way. When we're done and we're looking at the data of what we've gotten, we need to know that that represents every single aspect of our community.
So we call it what we call it, and then the first step or the first goal is to engage in community conversations surrounding inequalities.
Well,
The base, like I don't.
well, let's
Why don't we
make
start
it
with what
more
do we call
positive.
it? What do we call it? Let's start with what we call it, if we don't mind. So because then
Yeah,
we can,
I mean, I'm thinking racial equality.
great, but does that leave others out?
Yes,
But-
it does. So you may want to, you may want to have it as broad or as narrow as you want. What is the purpose and function of this? Are we looking at the racial inequalities? Are we looking at all of the inequalities from
LGBTQ plus.
Yeah,
female gender
but
issues?
and let me stop you there, because this is what I believe a lot of Black people, African American people want to get across, that yes, there are these other groups, but if we continue to say, okay, it's going to be broad, we're going to involve, then it waters down what we are trying to say, that Black lives matter. If we include everyone, racial means everybody's a race. And then we can, and remember it's a subcommittee, so we do have stuff in strategic plan, I believe, that discusses all of, like, you know, LGBTQ, all of that. And if not, then we can add it as a sub to it. But part of that, taking out that root canal, is that sometimes we will pack it back, oh, well, everybody is, but you're forgetting the point that I'm the one with the pain in my tooth. I just don't want us to lose that. Everybody is a race, so if we say race, relations, and equality or something to that effect, it encompasses everybody. And then subgroups can be all of the rest. And I am not leaving out anybody. But when you you talk about data, you look at the data, 10, 15 years ago, Blacks were the majority minority. And now Blacks are not the majority minority. They're the second, minority group. And yet, have we closed the gap with them? Are they still the highest on discipline and the highest on the achievement gap? We've got other races coming in that are still surpassing. So are we just packing over that nerve and saying, but look, we're majority minority, but our minorities are doing better. Our minorities as a whole. Have we forgotten?
So my recommendation would be, prior to naming, I would like to go back and just ensure that I just want to be cautious with regards to certain things from a legal standpoint.
Right.
So, but I understand what you're saying, so let me come back to board members with some guidance on that.
Okay, all right, I appreciate that. All right, so I know we're running out of time, so in terms of actionable steps, do you want the first step to be community outreach and perhaps get with, we can ask Dr. Adkins which members of his staff would be best positioned to help us achieve that community outreach? And what does community outreach look like? Is it me and you sitting at a Zoom meeting and people are coming in and they're talking? Is it me and you going to a church and a community organization? Like what?
All of the above.
Okay.
And I think it needs to be you and me as opposed to you and me and this director and this leader and
Oh, I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
Not the entourage.
And it's and in my mind, it's not me telling or you telling.
No, it's
not us
listening.
telling. It's us listening.
Yeah.
It's us
Yep.
hearing. And I'm assuming that in many circumstances you will be able to sympathize. Is sympathize? You'll be able to empathize, whereas
Empathize
I'll
is
only be
different.
able to sympathize.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So there'll be a lot of instances where you'll be able to engage better than I am. So it's really going to be more of a learning tour
And
for
not
me.
necessarily, because I don't want to just go to, all minority
No,
groups.
I understand. I
want to
understand.
go to a
Yep,
group
you're right.
where you have the ability
I
to.
was at a group last night where this kind of conversation would be very, very interesting.
Would I need to wear armor?
No, nothing like that. But you're right. That is a really good point, because we do have to have, I can tell you that as a white woman sitting next to you and having this conversation on camera in public, I said this at a workshop, I have to examine myself and what role I have played in this, not just as a school board member, but as a parent, as an instructor, as just everything. And that's hard.
We're talking about paradigm shifts here.
Right, exactly.
But we're talking about shifting it at the top and filtering it down.
Right.
Because if people see us shifting our paradigm, they tend to want to shift theirs. And so we do need to go to Benita and Estero and have this conversation where it's flipped, that you're going to empathize and I'm going to sympathize, because I'm like, really? Okay. So it's a learning experience. And I think when we talk about what do we take back to the board, I think we take back to the board saying that here is our plan, and tell me if I'm wrong, that number one, we want to find out what this looks like, not from our eyes, but from the community, all of the community. Um, and, um, and just an aside really quickly, going to other areas like, in your community and doing this, maybe it will help to educate some people.
Yeah, and, oh my gosh, brain fart, I completely forgot what I was gonna say.
Okay, well,
Oh, July. We're gonna be bored,
yeah,
so let's
we
hit
can
it
do
hard.
that. So, okay, so we're going to say to the board that sometime in July, we are going to start, and we can send this out as an email to them, letting them know where we're going, because,
I think we need to have board approval, because this is a subcommittee, so we would go back to the board and advise them of what you have discussed and what the recommendations are, and then have the board take a consensus. I don't think we need an action necessarily, although I like action items, but
Yeah, I
a
know.
consensus.
Okay, so, and our main thing is that we want to get to the point where we have a fifth item on strategic plan that is called whatever it is we decide we're going to call it. And the aspects of it would be, did you agree on the communication policy and curriculum? So communication is kind of covering everything. Policy would include that uh, discipline and all that kind of stuff, getting nitty gritty about it. And the curriculum is training for adults and curriculum classes for students.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with that one because, um, student achievement is number one in our strategic plan. So I see those things as already fitting in to student achievement and making sure that decisions we make with regard to student achievement are seen through the lens of equity. So I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. We can flesh that out as we go. Am I making sense to you?
I think the one thing I would say on that part of it is not just the student achievement, but also what the students are being taught and the exposure. I think if I'm
Understood.
correct, Ms.
Okay.
Gittens, is that
Okay.
what
I
you're
hear you.
referring to?
All right. I get it. I get it. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I get it. I hear
And
what you're
then
saying.
the words social emotional come into play. So a balance of the social emotional and the data somehow. So if we can, how soon then
Can I just flesh out something with you? So if we've been appointed as a subcommittee, why do we need board permission to go
Because
out?
the board doesn't know exactly what you guys are doing. I mean, this was, in the title of the subcommittee, the objective of the subcommittee
Nothing.
hasn't been fleshed
I
out.
hear ya.
So it does need to go, I would recommend that it go back to the board.
My only concern is we don't meet again for a month, and we might meet again.
Yeah, I
We might not.
have a feeling that with everything going on with school reopening, you probably will be meeting prior to the end of the month.
Okay.
And we could do a quick, as long as we have 7 days, I mean, even if we decided this week to have Jennifer put out a 7-day thing for a quick
Touch base.
Zoom meeting to touch base so that we can move forward.
And how is that? What time do we have? Are we running way late?
I've been monitoring, you have 20 more minutes.
Okay.
How is this different from EDAC? That question has already come to me. How is this different from EDAC?
The way I see it, it's something that we as a board are doing to affect change and issues in our community as a whole, not just one committee. How do I say this delicately? I think sometimes what we do is we will shift things so that, okay, this group is going to handle this. This is not something that one single group should handle. Not one advisory, not one liaison, but we all need to face it.
And I will add too that this is not an advisory group per se. This is a subcommittee created by the board to come back with some information and some suggestions for the board. I can see the similarities and parallel, but this I would say is a little bit different than a regular advisory group.
Okay.
More board driven, if you will.
Exactly. And I think what it does is show the community and the world that we, as individuals on this board, want to see us moving forward. As opposed to, okay, we get suggestions back from this advisory, we listen to it, yeah, that was wonderful, okay, but
Okay.
this is us. Yeah.
All right, so you're going to give some advice regarding the title, and we are going to go back to the board. If you wouldn't mind, you can handle reporting to the board on what our initial goals are. Our initial goals are community outreach, community conversations, whatever we want to call that, right? I think community conversations is good.
Yes, that's good.
That's, I failed to report on this to the board yesterday. I went to the Lee County Bar Association
Diversity
and Inclusion.
luncheon.
Yeah, they opened it up to the whole community. And I saw it on Facebook, so I went. And it was Chief Diggs, it was a black prosecutor, a black defense attorney, a couple other people. Restorative practices were discussed. And it was a community conversation, and it was so enlightening to just sit there and listen to them. And so that's what I wonder, if we're having community conversations, what is the conversation going to be? Is it going to be just two of us sitting up here saying, hey, come to us and tell us what your experiences have been? Is it going to be panelists who discuss their experiences and then take feedback from the community? Like, what structurally, what does it look like?
If we decide as a board the categories like we talked about, then I think I think that there should be somewhat of a template or an agenda that these are the items that we want to get feedback on. And then it begs the question, do we listen? And I think we do. We listen first, and then second wave is sending out, information, because we're not going to get everybody coming, whether Zoom or not. So phase one is to listen audibly through, digitally or a town hall. Phase two is electronically or whatever, or by mailing out, information.
Sorry, I have COVID, PTSD.
No.
As you say, phase one and phase two.
Oh, I know.
It's COVID.
No, I'm not talking COVID. But I mean, what do you think of that? So our first, because we're kind of in the midst of people wanting to talk about it, that if we do the verbal piece first and then the written piece next.
So verbally, we do the verbal piece. What does that look like?
Like I said, we look at what are the areas of concern. If we, and I'm not trying to force these three things on you, but I'm just saying, if we did communication policy and curriculum, we're asking them in these particular areas, how have you been, or how has your child been affected in any one of these areas? We give an example, communication. Do you receive, have you received information, and how have you given and shared information, and what policies have affected your children, or do you think we need to look at? And curriculum, how do you feel about us adding cultural training?
So when I say, what does it look like? I mean, this room is packed full of the community right now. What do we do? That's what I mean by structurally, what does it look like?
Right, we would have put out to them that here's our town hall. These are the 3 topics we're going to discuss.
I think what she's trying to say is it going to be the two of you just listening to individuals that are coming in, or are you going to have a formal presentation, or is there going to be a panel? I think the actual nuts and bolts of how
Right.
this.
Do we want to have a panel?
I don't know, that's what I'm asking. I really don't.
I don't know.
I mean, in the beginning, the two of you just trying to gather the information from the community.
Because I don't want to intimidate people. And sometimes you will hear from a different group if they're not. I go back to when I was a teacher and getting parents to come to things. And if they felt intimidated, like they were not as smart as all these people, they just didn't come. They didn't participate. I think we need to have translators, for one. And because then that says, we really want to hear what you have to say. So I think the casual, first of all. You know, here's some topics we're going to discuss. How do you, or what experiences do you have, or what would you like to see happen differently?
All right, so maybe we get with, after we go to the board, we get with Greg and ask to work with Irma about, community outreach, what that looks like, and how to accomplish it, and then really hit it hard. Like really hit it hard.
So
Make it a priority on our schedules.
So the verbal,
calendars.
then the written, then whatever follow-up we have.
Okay, and then, so we go out, we receive information from the community, we allow the community to have these conversations about inequality and how it impacts them individually in schools. And from there, we will see themes, right?
Yes.
I won't call it data, I'll call it themes. From there, we will see themes. And
You're doing so good.
and we'll bring those themes back to the board for discussion on action items.
Yep.
Sounds good.
So that's what we go to the board with?
If that's the plan that you guys agree to, that's what you go to the board.
Do you think that that is a reasonable?
I think so. I think it's a good start.
Okay.
And that we want to do it in July.
We want to do it ASAP.
Yep.
Because why waste a month? When
Exactly.
we have nothing else going on anyways.
Exactly.
Did it shock the heck out of you the first time you sat on the board that you had a whole month off?
I know. It's like, what do you do? But you really don't, because you're still doing all kinds of stuff.
So are we good? You feel like we've covered what we
Yeah,
need
I
to
think
cover
so
here today?
too. And, shall we put this in a format? I'll put down what I have and send it to you. And once we get it to where we want it to look, then we can, how do we send it to the board?
Send it to,
Me, I guess.
yeah, send it to you. And so,
And we will have it, make sure that it's part of the, I would ask that it be part of the agenda so that you guys can really.
well, you know what? If you send it to both of us, you send it to me and
Well, if
Attorney
it's,
Dupree Bruno, then I can give my comments to you. And then there's no sunshine violation, right?
I would prefer if you just send it to me.
Okay.
Send it to me, and then from there, I will move forward with taking care of it.
Okay, so I'll send out the draft to both of you at first, right?
Send it to me,
Oh, okay. And then you'll send it to her?
and then I will have my one-on-one conversation, or
Good.
Okay.
All right, good.
Okay. All right.
it's not really, at this point, it's not something that's actually going to come before the board. It's just something that we're talking about. And then when it's ready to come before the board, then we'll formally.
All right, good.
All righty. Thank you.
All right.
And we are 10 minutes ahead of schedule.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we want to